47 caps. First black man to captain England. A Premier League medal won the hard way. Paul Ince was never a passenger. He was the engine. But long after the boots are hung up, the ledger stays open. And Paul Ince keeps a very long ledger. 10 names. 10 feuds. 10 people he will never, ever forgive. Let's look past the glossy nostalgia of the Premier League's early years. Let's look at the psychology of a man who built his entire career on being the hardest voice in the dressing room. Because when you demand total obedience, you don't make teammates. You make debtors. And Paul Ince believes the world owes him. Here is the truth nobody wants to say out loud. Ince's legendary combative streak wasn't just a tactical asset. It was a weapon he turned inward, burning bridges with the very people who built him. Let's go back. Way back. Number 10 on the list. Lothar Matthäus. Starts in Italy.
Inter Milan.
1995. Ince arrives in Serie A wearing the arrogance of Manchester United like body armor. He thinks he can bully the San Siro the way he bullied Highbury or Anfield. Matthäus, the German machine, the Ballon d'Or winner, isn't impressed. To Matthäus, Ince is just another loud English runner. To Ince, Matthäus is a political operator trying to freeze him out of the club's power structure. The clash wasn't about football. It was about turf. Who ran the dressing room? Who commanded respect? Ince wanted the throne. Matthäus was already sitting on it. They didn't just clash. They declared a Cold War. Ince survived in Milan through sheer, bloody-minded stubbornness. But he left Italy with a permanent grievance. He didn't adapt to European football's political subtleties. He tried to body-check them. And when Matthäus didn't bow, Ince locked him into the mental vault of enemies. Gone. Just like that. Move down the list. Number 9. Peter Schmeichel. Now, you'd think winning trophies together would forge an unbreakable bond. You'd think the bedrock of Alex Ferguson's 1990s Manchester United empire was built on brotherhood. Think again. Schmeichel was a literal giant, vocally terrifying, a goalkeeper who screamed obscenities at his own defenders if they breathed wrong. Ince was the midfielder who demanded the ball, controlled the tempo, and expected everyone to march to his drumbeat. When two apex predators share a cage, someone loses an ear. During training sessions at the Cliff, the clashes between Ince and Schmeichel were legendary. Not polite football disagreements. Full-blown, fists nearly flying, ego-shattering explosions. Ince couldn't handle a teammate who shouted louder than he did. Schmeichel thought Ince was a tactical liability who held onto the ball too long. Years later, when asked about their relationship, the smiles are thin. The PR answers are hollow. Ince remembers every dropped cross that Schmeichel blamed him for. Schmeichel remembers every Hollywood pass Ince played that left the defense exposed. They tolerated each other for the medals. The moment the whistles stopped blowing, the relationship died. Number 8. Teddy Sheringham. The classic English football soap opera. This one goes deeper than club loyalty. It goes into the very DNA of English social hierarchy. When Ince and Sheringham crossed paths on international duty and later at club level, it was oil and water. Sheringham was the smooth, calculating, public school-adjacent striker who played the game with a smirk. Ince was the council estate-raised warrior who wore his chips on both shoulders. Ince perceived Sheringham's calmness as arrogance. Sheringham perceived Ince's intensity as exhausting, performative macho posturing. Remember the infamous England hotel bar stories? The friction wasn't accidental. It was tribal. Ince couldn't stand anyone who didn't buy into his brand of high-octane suffering. Sheringham didn't suffer for the aesthetic. He just scored goals. And that drove Ince mad. Let me be fair for a second. Ince's intensity was real. He wasn't faking the toughness. But his fatal flaw was simple. He assumed anyone who wasn't screaming at the top of their lungs didn't care as much as he did. And that brings us to the middle tier of the ledger, where things get messy. Number 7 on Paul Ince's permanent blacklist. The Liverpool Spice Boys culture. Let's set the scene. Mid to late 1990s. Anfield. Ince arrives from Inter Milan with a massive reputation. He's supposed to be the final piece of the puzzle. The serial winner who brings a championship mentality to a talented but underachieving Liverpool squad featuring Jamie Redknapp, Robbie Fowler, and Steve McManaman. Instead, what does Ince find? A dressing room culture he views as soft, entitled, and distracted by glossy magazine covers and white Armani suits. To Ince, football was a blood sport. To the young English stars at Liverpool, it was a lifestyle. Ince tried to police them. He tried to drag them into his 1993 Manchester United mindset by sheer force of personality. But football had changed. The Premier League was commercializing rapidly. The era of the hard-drinking, aggressively hierarchical dressing room was dying, replaced by brand-conscious athletes. Ince fought the tide. And because he couldn't bully them into changing their lifestyle, he resented them. The tension leaked into matches. Pass selection became political. Body language on the pitch became toxic. When Ince left Liverpool in 1999, it wasn't a mutual parting of ways. It was an eviction. And to this day, Ince speaks about that era with thinly veiled contempt, framing himself as the only professional in a room full of celebrities. Number 6. Neil Warnock. Now, this is where the grudge turns from tactical clashes to pure, unadulterated street fighting. Neil Warnock is the ultimate anti-establishment figure in English management, a lower league warlord who loves nothing more than winding up big-name former players turned managers. When Ince took his first steps into management at Swindon Town, Macclesfield, and crucially Milton Keynes Dons, the football establishment looked down their noses at him. Warnock didn't just look down, he poked the bear. Their touchline clashes were explosive. Warnock, the wily veteran of 1,000 mud-soaked relegation scraps, treating Ince like a rookie playing dress-up in a technical area. Ince, hypersensitive to any slight on his credentials, biting at every single piece of bait Warnock dropped. Why does Ince hold onto this one? Because Warnock exposed Ince's deepest insecurity. That despite playing at the very highest level, management wasn't going to hand him instant respect on a silver platter. Warnock didn't care about Ince's caps. He didn't care about his Premier League medals. On a Tuesday night in League One, Warnock treated Ince like a nobody. And Ince has never forgiven him for refusing to kiss the ring. Number 5. Graham Souness. This one cuts close to home. Souness was the blueprint. The fierce, uncompromising, midfield enforcer who dominated matches, won everything, and took no prisoners. Paul Ince modeled large parts of his game and his persona on Graham Souness. So what happens when the student meets the master, and the master thinks the student is a fraud? When Souness was manager of Blackburn Rovers, Ince was brought in as a veteran leader. But Souness wasn't looking for a co-pilot. He was looking for compliance. Souness realized quickly that Ince's ego had grown larger than his legs. The transition from world-class midfielder to fading veteran requires humility. Ince had none. Their relationship fractured behind closed doors. Souness questioned Ince's influence in the dressing room, suspecting him of undermining authority when things went wrong. Ince felt betrayed by the one man in football he thought would understand his mentality. When you copy someone's playbook and they use it to defeat you, it's not just a loss. It's an existential insult. Ince never forgave Souness for seeing right through his tough guy act. Let's pause here. Look at the pattern. Matthäus, Schmeichel, Sheringham, the Spice Boys, Warnock, Souness. Every single one of these men committed the exact same crime in Ince's eyes. They didn't submit to his self-appointed status as the ultimate authority in the room. And we haven't even reached the heavy hitters yet. Number 4 on the list, Mark Hughes. Sparky, the quintessential Manchester United hardman. A striker who used his elbows as navigation tools and terrified centre-backs across Europe. You would think Ince and Hughes would be blood brothers. For a long time they fought in the trenches together under Ferguson. They bled for the badge. So where did it turn sour? Management and ambition. When Ince was trying to carve out his reputation as a manager, and Hughes was establishing himself in the Premier League dugout, the dynamic shifted from mutual respect to professional rivalry. But it goes deeper than that. In the tight-knit fraternity of 90s United alumni, loyalty is currency. Ince expected unconditional support from his old comrades. When former teammates treated him like any other rival manager, out-tacticking him, celebrating wins against his struggling teams. Ince took it personally. To Ince, a tackle on the pitch is forgotten. A tactical defeat in the dugout by an old friend? That's treason. Number 3, Roy Keane. This is where the narrative shifts from professional friction to a generational collision. When Manchester United needed to replace Paul Ince in 1995, Sir Alex Ferguson didn't just buy a midfielder. He bought an upgrade. He bought Roy Keane. Think about what that does to a man's ego. Ince didn't just lose his place, he was deemed obsolete. Ferguson sold him to Inter Milan because he believed Ince's growing celebrity, the leather jackets, the media profile, the Guv'nor moniker was starting to eclipse the team. In walked Roy Keane. No flash, no media distractions. Just pure, terrifying, metronomic destruction. Keane didn't just take Ince's shirt. He took Ince's entire cultural footprint at Old Trafford and amplified it tenfold. Whenever Ince looks back at United's treble-winning era, he doesn't see a club he helped build the foundations for. He sees the house he was kicked out of, being run by a man who did his job better. Ince and Keane have a frosty, distant relationship. They share a TV studio occasionally, and the tension is thick enough to cut with a rusty butter knife. Ince will never admit it, but Keane is the living, breathing proof that Ince was replaceable. And that is the one thing Paul Ince cannot tolerate. Number 2, Ryan Giggs. This one hurts. This one is Shakespearean. Ryan Giggs and Paul Ince weren't just teammates. They were brothers in arms during United's rise. Ince, the older, protective, ultra-confident older brother who shielded the teenage Giggs from the brutal physicality of early 90s defenders. When Giggs broke through, Ince was his biggest champion on the pitch, barking orders to make sure everyone protected the kid. So why is Giggs so high on the blacklist? Because as Giggs matured into a global superstar and won everything under the sun, the power dynamic inverted. The kid outgrew the mentor. And worse, when Ince's career began its downward slope, bouncing from club to club while Giggs remained at the pinnacle of footballing royalty, the distance between them became unbridgeable. Ince expected lifelong deference. Giggs moved on. In the hyper-masculine world of football nostalgia, old bonds don't fade away gracefully. They curdle into resentment. Ince watches from the outside as United's class of '92 mythology dominates the history books, while his own contributions are quietly minimized by the very people he once protected. And that brings us to the top of the pyramid, the origin of the curse. Number 1. Sir Alex Ferguson. Number 1 on Paul Ince's ledger. The man who made him. The man who broke him. Sir Alex Ferguson. Let's go back to the summer of 1995. Manchester United had just surrendered the Premier League title to Blackburn Rovers. Ferguson is furious. He looks at his dressing room and decides it's time for radical surgery. He sells Paul Ince to Inter Milan. He sells Andrei Kanchelskis. He sells Mark Hughes. The football establishment gasps. Ferguson is committing suicide, they say. You don't sell your best midfielder in his prime. Do you remember how Ferguson announced it? Do you remember the infamous line about Ince's head being turned by off-field celebrity? Ferguson famously claimed Ince was falling in love with himself, spending too much time with his DJ equipment and his public profile, and losing the savage edge required to win. Publicly, Ince fought back. He defended his professionalism. He proved in Italy that he could play at the absolute highest level. Privately, it broke something inside him, because Paul Ince didn't just want to play for Alex Ferguson. He wanted to be Ferguson's equal. He wanted to be the general who ran the army. Ferguson, of course, was an absolute autocrat. There was only room for one boss at Old Trafford. And when Ince started acting like he co-owned the club, Ferguson chopped his legs out from under him and shipped him off to Lombardy with a warning label attached. Every single feud on this list, from Matthäus to Souness to Keane, is a downstream effect of that original trauma. Ince spent the rest of his career and his entire managerial life trying to prove that Ferguson was wrong about him. Trying to prove that he wasn't a distraction, that he wasn't unmanageable, that he was the ultimate authority. When you live your life trying to settle a score with the most powerful manager in football history, everyone else becomes collateral damage. Let me be fair for a second. Paul Ince was a phenomenal footballer. He played with a level of courage and physical commitment that modern players wouldn't survive. When he crossed that white line, he left everything of himself on the grass. You don't captain England and win trophies at Manchester United by being a fraud. His toughness was authentic. His achievements are carved into the history of the English game. Drop your take or verdict in the comments. I read every single one. A like genuinely helps more than you'd think. And subscribe if you want this kind of unfiltered football history. Because here is the tragic irony of Paul Ince's ledger. In trying to prove he was the toughest man in football, he trapped himself in the past. While the rest of the sport evolved, moving toward data, emotional intelligence, sports science, and collaborative management, Ince remained locked in a 1993 dressing room, still screaming at anyone who dared to look him in the eye. He is still fighting battles the sport finished decades ago. He wanted to be the Guv'nor of English football. Instead, he became the prisoner of his own myth. Football at this scale is never just a tournament or a career. It's a psychological battlefield. And Paul Ince is still standing in the ruins, keeping score, refusing to forgive a world that simply walked past him and left him behind. Just gone. Bye-bye. I'll see you in the next one.